well, discovered that the principle of healing humans and healing land are one and the same. And as far as in society, he has a bachelor in sociology from Seoul National University, a master's in environmental policy. He's previously worked in the foreign ministry of Korea. He's been a consul in Sydney, Australia. And yeah, just all around wonderful human being. And so I'm really excited for Ray's talk to begin, which is about natural farming, facts or fictions, a yin yang perspective. So, with that, I would like to welcome Ray Yoon here today.
Hello. Very nice to see you again, Peter. And it's a great honor to be here. Such wonderful speakers. And what I feel most beautiful about this is that why we are doing this. So we talk a lot about methods and recipes and the science. That's all good. But I am really happy that we come together to discuss why we are doing this and what we want to achieve. Specifically, I'm talking about how we want to heal the land, like Joanne put it, remineralize the earth, and how we can use farming to help the people. So my presentation is focused in that aspect, and I will start the screen share. Is it on?
Yes.
Okay, so
yep,
okay,
it's great.
So so I have set freedom as the goal of farming, and I will explain why that is so. And my discussion will be based on a yin-yang philosophical perspective. So I've been involved in farming for maybe 20 years or so, and I've heard a lot about these alternative approaches. And so I was thinking yesterday, actually, that okay, let's get radical. How radical can we get? So I put together all these principles taught by different teachers. So there's the no tillage, no chemical fertilizer, no herbicide, no pesticide, no weeding, no pruning, no commercial or hybrid GM seeds. And what I feel more is that I think no tillage is probably the most important of all these principles. And to be honest, I still do weed because it's impossible to grow crops without weeding. But the rest, I think I'm pretty doing well. But we can get even more radical. So I'm talking about the use of plastic, like plastic mulching to suppress weeds, or even the greenhouses, and no oil, and the use of no machines. And no government does not mean that I'm against any government. I'm saying that we should not be dependent upon government subsidies or government funding or government policies, but we should be able to do our job independently. And no corporations would mean that we want to be independent from the products and commodities that they sell, so that we should still be able to farm without buying them. And if you want to get even more radical, I would say we should be able to farm without any money, because now the farming has become too much of something for the rich people. Like the rich people who can invest money, they will be producing premium organic food and selling it to the rich people. And the people who has the money will be the ones who enjoy the most high quality food. So I think breaking this dependence upon money is also very important. And one of the tragedy of our modern times is that people have become too much of a being of money. So like if you don't have money, you feel that you don't have any dignity. And all your life you're pursuing money, but actually it is the pursuit of money that destroys dignity. And I want to get even more radical. Okay, so this is a point I'm raising today. Farming without any inputs. So inputs, we all know what inputs are. It's like the compost, fertilizer, minerals, microbes, everything. I'm not saying that we should not use it, but I'm saying that we can find an approach to farming that you need these inputs less and less. So nowadays, when I'm farming, I don't do any composting. I don't do liquid fertilizer. I don't do plant extracts. I don't spray at all. I don't even do those natural herbal pesticides, which I found they don't work. Nothing about, none of those calcium or phosphorus solutions. Just previously when Joanne was presenting, I saw in the video from Brazil that the guy was saying that it is more process-based rather than input-based. That is exactly what I wanted to say. And when I talk about farming, I would say that you have to learn from nature. And when you look at nature, I have thought over and over again, but I can only find these two laws. And I think that these are sufficient. They explain everything. And not even two, these two laws are actually one law, and that is the plant-animal balance. So this is the fundamental structure where our entire ecosystem is designed upon. So plants feed animals, animals feed plants. So plants, they produce organic matter through photosynthesis, and then animals eat it and then poop it back and feed the plants. So grass feeding the animal, and the animal poop feeding the grass. But this relation is not only limited to big animals like that. If you look at this, this is an alder tree. The root has a nodule which contains nitrogen-fixing bacteria. So the plant feeds the nitrogen-fixing bacteria with organic matter. So the plant gives food to bacteria, and then the bacteria gives nitrogen back to the plant. So they are living in a symbiosis. Also a picture I took of a root, and you can see some microbial colony living together with the root. And this is a lichen. They are made of fungus and algae. So the algae is the plant that provides food for the fungus. And then the fungus will also provide food for the algae, because the fungus will digest the rock and deliver minerals to the algae. And the fungus also provides protection. So this relation of plants feeding animals and animals feeding plants, that is the most important law of our ecosystem and also of our farming. So what I've explained can be illustrated in this kind of diagram where the plants come out from the soil and then plants feed the animals. Animal poop will go back, remineralize and fertilize the soil. And that is actually also same as this picture. The food comes out from soil and all food will turn into poop, and the poop goes back to soil. This is very, very, very important, because this cycle has been broken, and that break in the cycle is what is causing a catastrophe in our agriculture and many more. For example, by introducing chemical fertilizer and you are not recycling poop back to soil. So because you're not recycling nutrients back, the soil is getting depleted. And then you are actually introducing a foreign substance called chemical fertilizer, NPK, which really disrupts the soil mineral balance. And when you kill the soil, when the soil dies, it no longer produces healthy food. So the soil is depleted in minerals, so it will produce food depleted in minerals. I remember Steve Diver saying yesterday that we are half the man we used to be compared to our grandfathers. And one of the major reasons is that that's because the food nowadays is only like 1/10 the food that our grandfathers used to eat. So that cycle has been broken, and then this cycle is also broken. So because our health has been deteriorated, our I think almost all of our guts are diseased and they're not functioning properly. So we don't produce the right poop. Sounds a bit weird, but anyway, another aspect of this picture is that when we break the food poop linkage, I'm specifically referring to the use of waste, which Paul Olivier talked about yesterday. And I'll be talking more details later. So I said two laws. One is the plant-animal balance, and another is the cycle of nutrients. So what I'm saying is that everything that came from soil must return to soil. And how does soil fertility grow? It grows because life grows on the soil. So we typically think that it is only the life that comes out of soil, but it is also the soil that comes out of life, because that plant-animal balance, that plant-animal activity is what is actually fertilizing the soil. So what can we learn from this? Number one is that we need the right number of plants and right number of animals. So it should always be mixed farming where the livestock and crops are growing together. And you need the right balance between the plant activity and the animal activity. So if you have too much animals, you will overgraze the land and it'll turn into desert. If you have too much plants and no animals, the decomposition of organic matter will not be sufficient and eventually turn into desert. And if you look at Mother Nature, it is always the plants, animals together in balance, creating fertility. But most of the models of farming that we have invented is like monocrop, just plants all over, or the CAFO, the concentrated animal feeding system, where it's just only the animals. That is why you have to bring in fertilizer from outside or bring in feed from outside. So all these outside dependency is what I want to be free from. And number two is that there is also the right way of feeding plants to animals, which specifically I would refer to the holistic grazing, like Alan Savory is talking about, which is basically very fast rotation of animals within a very small space in a very high density. And actually, there's just one thing that you achieve through that, and that is maximum grass growth. So you have maximum grass growth, which assures maximum animal growth, and maximum grass and animal growth assures maximum soil fertility. That is how I see the crux of holistic farming. And number three is there's the right way of utilizing animal manure. Paul Olivier talked such a wonderful talk yesterday. I really appreciate. And this is exactly what I'm talking about. We need to have the maximum efficiency in the use of animal manure. And as a result of these three practices, we will have soil fertility. What that means is you achieve soil fertility through plant-animal balance and cycle of nutrients. And that should be your main approach instead of using compost or bringing in inputs or microbial applications. Those are all good, but they should not be the main approach. So let me explain a little about yin-yang perspective, why I'm talking about this and why this is important. I'm not talking about something philosophical. This, you will find this is very, very practical, immediately applicable to your farming. This is the yin-yang symbol. You can see there's the white part, that's the yang. The black part is the yin. So you can see the interaction between the yin and yang. And you can also see that the yin is inside yang and yang is inside yin. This is a simplified picture of yin-yang, but to be more correct, you need the yin within yang and yang within yin. Okay, if you look at this picture, you now start to see that there's no cycling, there's no interaction between the two. So this is dead. This is not yin-yang. And this gets even worse when the yin and yang two separate and they're not able to interact. This is no longer yin-yang. So there's a reason why this diagram came to be. And this exactly describes the properties of yin-yang. So yang can only be yang in relation to yin. So the yin and yang, they cannot exist separately. And it originates from ancient cosmology. And the first idea comes from heaven and earth. So you observe heaven and you observe earth. And the ancient people would identify heaven as the yang, the father, and earth as the mother, yin. So like rain would be the fertilizing of the womb coming down from father. And you have the winter and the summer, the cold and the hot. That can also be yin and yang. You have the wet and the dry. That's also yin and yang. And aerobic fermentation, I see it as yang, and anaerobic fermentation, I see it as yin. So rather than approaching it as which is good or bad, you have to see that the two processes are interacting and they need each other. When you dig the ground, you have the topsoil and you have the subsoil. So you can also say that the subsoil is the yin and topsoil is the yang. And you have the seeds that sprout. All this is just a perspective. So this is a perspective of perceiving the seed as the yin. It is asleep, but it becomes active. So it becomes the sprout and it turns into yang. So this also can explain the nutrient types of whether it's brown, more carbon focused, or it's green, nitrogen focused. And plants photosynthesize. They produce organic matter. They produce food for animals. Animals eat, and they poop. Fungus is also a type of an animal. So microbes, most of them are animals. Of course, there are plant microbes, but so what I'm saying here is plants belong to the yin side, and animals belong to the yang side. So plants, they create, they make food, and the animals, they disassemble the food and then destroy it into small particles and return it back to the plants. So in that yin-yang perspective, now you can redraw the diagram of plants feed animals and animals feed the plants. where the plants become the yin, cycles into the animals, and the animals is the yang that cycles back into the plants. Same applies to soil and life. When I said the soil grows life and life grows soil, this can be represented in this kind of yin-yang diagram. So where am I getting to discussing about yin and yang? Now you have nature and you have the civilization. And nature and civilization, how do we perceive that relationship? We can see it as a yin and yang. What I mean is that all our civilization, if you look at it, it is built by destroying the forest. So we actually rely on the nature. And we cannot keep going thinking that we are separate and we can continue to develop by exploiting nature. That is against the interrelationship of yin and yang. And coming down more to details, this is what I really want to talk about. Based on this yin-yang approach, I want to analyze farming, where the farm does not stand in itself, but the farm is always in relation to the forest. So farm becomes the yang and forest becomes the yin. So they are in yin-yang relationship. Too many times we think that farm is separate from the forest and you actually clear the forest, you cut the trees and then you make the farm. But actually it is the forest that is saving the farm. And ultimately they are and they have to be linked in one ecosystem, where so the farm will be an extension of the forest instead of a separation from the forest. And there's a lot of other people doing great work like permaculture, food forest. Basically, it's the same idea, but I'm just bringing in a new tool of perspective, which is the yin and yang. So forest is the mother and farm is the child, and they cannot live without one another. Especially the child cannot live without the mother. So you can see the yin-yang cycle between the forest and the farm. So this is a macro perspective. So the forest and the farm relationship. Basically, what I'm trying to build is a farm that does not benefit from the destruction of the forest, but actually benefits from the wellness of the forest. And I believe this is how the future should be. And I will repeat this later, so it's very important. A farm that does not benefit from the destruction of the forest, but from the wellness of the forest. So we looked at it in a macro level, but you can come down smaller scale down to the farm, and you can see that the uncultivated part will be the forest, and the cultivated part is the farm. And they're still in yin-yang relations. So how does the forest save the farm? Firstly, you can bring in infinite amount of leaves, leaf mold, branches, organic matter, microorganisms, and all this plant matter is what I brought from the forest into my field to fertilize it. And the forest soil is the best soil in the world. So if you can make your farm soil like that, then you don't need to do any farming anymore. So that is what I mean by the farm becoming an extension of the forest. So they become a same ecosystem where the farm soil becomes the same as the forest soil. And that is what we should be aiming for in our farming. And the forest also provides habitat for all kinds of insects, animals. I will not say that it provides the habitat for predators. It provides the habitat for everything. And then the predators will come to save your farmland from the pests. This is how farming is practiced today. So you have the elevated beds and you have the crops. Everything is very nice, clean, no weeds. But this kind of view it looks a bit sad to me. I prefer this kind of picture. So in the elevated place, you have the crops and you have the mulching. And in the lower parts, I will just let the weeds grow like crazy. If you compare the root systems, unfortunately, we all know that the crops that we grow, when we pull it out, it just comes out so easily because they have very shallow roots. But if you try to pull out a weed, you never pull it out because it just breaks, because it has such a strong, robust root system. What does this mean? Previously, I said that it is the life that grows soil. So life activity will fertilize your soil. The weed part on the right has much, much higher life activity, which means that part of soil is being fertilized. That soil is becoming richer and richer, much faster than the soil on the left where your crops are growing. Which means that we can also call the crop part the farm and the weed part the forest. So we are started from macro perspective and we are coming more micro and micro, where we are finding the farm and forest within the rows of your farmland. And then we discover the interrelationship of yin and yang again, where the weedy part of your farm will actually fertilize the soil in order to help save the crop part of your farm. So you can see the macro perspective of yin and yang, the forest farm interaction. And on the right, you can see that the yin and yang becomes smaller. So this is, you have the yin within the yang and yang within the yin. We also call it the differentiation. And this is how we explain the changes in the universe. The book of I Ching that Peter mentioned yesterday, it is literally translated as the book of change. So it's all about bringing in yin and yang principles in order to explain change in our universe. And change means life, because life is always moving. And the most important change in the world is this life. How does life survive and thrive? And how can we use yin and yang principle in farming to promote life activity? That is the question. So if you take out all the weeds and get rid of it, and your farm is very clean, so you're breaking the yin and yang cycle. So where does the yang go to? It doesn't have the yin, and there's no yin to support the yang. And then you will have soil depletion. So this is the kind of farmland I began with. You don't need to be overwhelmed by the weeds. You can cut them down. So I did not use any machine. I just cut them all by hand. No, not by hand, by sickle, to be more precise. So I just cut them all, and then you can see I have created rows where there's a row for the crops and a row for the weeds. So that is the yin and yang interrelationship. Sometimes I intentionally let the weeds grow like this between the crops. But of course, you never allow them to overpower your crops. So you do need to cut them down. So this is a picture of beans after I have cut the weeds in between the beans. And you have a very good growth, fantastic growth. They grow like crazy. So I was expecting a very successful bean harvest before the deer came. You can see that you don't have that much of a weed problem as you might expect. People get scared and then they say, oh, you have to use plastic mulch and then cover the land with plastic, but I don't do that. I don't like it. And I feel very sad. When I farm, I feel very sad whenever I find these particles of plastic in the soil that the people have left previously. And this is all you need. I don't use any machines. I use hand tools. And I will be mentioning later, but why do I stick to this kind of practice is because I want to minimize our reliance and dependence on machines, which is actually reliance and dependence on money. So I believe people should be able to farm without money. And that is the farming that can really help the people, especially the poor people. And as a result, you have a crazy bursting of life. Like I have seen so many spiders and other creatures. Snake. I thought this was also a snake, but it was not a snake. So you will now understand why I am bringing in this yin-yang concept. That is because I want to really emphasize that our farm depends on the forest. It relies on the forest, and the farm cannot survive without the forest. But because we do not understand this, people tend to break it. They will just destroy the forest farm relations, and they will just exploit the forest, believing that your farm will prosper. But actually, the result is a disaster. This is another triangle that I always teach people. Very, very important. Environmental problems, farming, and poverty, they are one problem. What I'm saying is this. So you have starvation, you don't have food, then people will go out and cut the forest and build more farms, clear the mountains. But as a result, it is actually the soil that dies, because if you don't have the forest, there will be floods and drought, and the soil will turn into desert. And because the forest and farm is linked, if you kill the forest, the farm also dies. So the soil dies, which is an environmental disaster. Then you have starvation. And then you have starvation, and then people again go into the forest and believing that killing the forest will bring life to their farms. They repeat the same mistake again and turn into a vicious cycle. And we need to stop this and change this into a good cycle. And I will give you an example of one of the methods that I have practiced. And I need to mention that I was inspired by the double digging method, which is, I think, almost 200 years old method originating from Europe. This is applicable in hard soil, compacted soil. It is not, you don't need this on good soil. This is only for hard soil. Because I was given with this kind of land where even the pickaxe had a very hard time digging into the soil. So I tried to change this into a fertile land. And I worked like this. My pickaxe was worn down like that. And then I could create a farm where I could produce food on that kind of compacted, depleted land. So this is how it goes. First, you dig a trench. and you put in, this is manure, cow manure, and then you punch holes, you drill deeper. So the trench is about 2 feet deep, but you bring the fork and you shove it in, aerate it further. So you'll have about 3 feet of space into the ground that is being aerated. And then, of course, you bring the biochar and bring in organic matter. So this is the, again, you can see clearly how the forest is saving the farm. You bring in, where do you bring the organic matter from? You always bring it from the forest. You bring it from the empty part of your farm. So you bring it in and add some more cow manure, biochar, and bone powder. Bone powder is good, but nowadays I use more of just whole bones itself, because bone powder, bone meals I have to buy, and I don't want to buy it. But the whole bones, I can get it free from the restaurants. So this is how it looks like. So you have the raised bed, and then beside the bed you have the trench. It's much, much deeper than the ordinary garden that we build. So I was very proud of this. I was calling this the yin-yang experimental planet-saving garden, but my friends were just calling this a graveyard. So what is happening specifically within the trench? So because I have dug a very deep hole and added in organic matter, all this air, water, nutrient is entering from these surfaces. And I have increased greatly the surface area. And as a result, you have a multi-dimensional topsoil formation. And then, again, you can bring in the yin-yang concept to explain this. You can see the wet, the dark, the low, the inactive, the empty. That part is the yin. That is the characteristics of yin. So we can also call it the forest. That's the forest part of your farm. And the bed part is the dry, the bright, the high, the active, the occupied by crops. So that is the farm part of your farmland. And again, you can see that they are in interaction, where the yin is helping the yang grow. So first year, you dig trench like that. Second year, you dig trench on another part of your bed. And third year, you change the trench again. So you shift the trench. Basically, when I first learned about double digging, it was about digging your entire field in 2 shovel depth. And that was just too much of a labor. So that's why I came up with this idea of shifting your digging in a few years like this. And this can also be explained in yin-yang perspective. So you are creating more and more yin-yang differentiation within your field. This is the bones that I mentioned that I'm using now. I get it free from the restaurants because Koreans, they eat a lot of bone broth. There are many restaurants that have leftover bones. And I bring them in. They are excellent for agriculture. At first, I was wondering, how do I utilize these bones? So because I learned many other methods and recipes, I was thinking, oh, should I put them in vinegar and dissolve the minerals out of it? Or should I burn them? Should I turn them into charcoal. Should I char them and then pulverize them and then put them in vinegar? Or I was not sure what I should do with the bones. But then I realized that all this kind of confusion that I had was unnecessary, because if you have bones, my conclusion was you don't need to do anything. You just throw the bones on the soil and that's it. Why do you need to pulverize or dissolve or burn the bones? I'm not saying those are bad or you should not do it. There are certain benefits to those methods. And if those benefits are something you need, you can do it. There's no problem. But what I'm saying is, for myself, I was obscured by my own knowledge about recipes, that I could not see the simple truth that throwing bones on the soil will do the job and finish. You can see that the plants really love the bones. They're using it as a necklace. And the issue of biochar. If I talk about biochar, this will become too long, but I will mention that I am using a lot of biochar in my soil. So I incorporate them into my soil. So bones and biochar and manure. Bones, biochar, and manure. They are the three major ingredients that I put into my soil. And then there's the bioceramics, or the fermented minerals. This one is taught by Chris Dernay. Great guy. I learned a lot. He's got so much knowledge. And that bioceramic part, I have not experimented fully. I cannot explain much. But according to his theory, those four elements, biochar, manure, bones, and bioceramics, they are the essential ingredients of terra preta, the magical soil of the Amazon. So I planted in this graveyard. And of course, you have these so-called pest problem. I really dislike the term pest. I don't like the word pest, the word weed, and the word pathogen. I think they are words that have been coined with an intention of creating humans' dislike for these living organisms, and also provide a very good comfort in our minds as we kill them, spray them, and then poison them to death. We feel much better when we are thinking that we are killing something evil, when in actuality, the evil is us. So I just use the word pest for convenience sake, but so I have these pests in the field, but they never become a problem because there's always the predators. And I don't really mind the insects eating part of my plants. They can take about 20 or 30%. I just let them eat, because I don't believe the farmland even belongs to humans. And this is an interesting experiment I did. You can see the red arrows. This is where my cabbage and radish are growing. And you can see all the red arrows are pointing to something that is standing. You will remember that I used a sickle to cut down the weeds in order to open the land, but I intentionally left some of the weeds, the tall ones, because all these tall stalks standing, they will be the anchoring ground for spiders. Those spiders will attach their webs and connect all these stalks, and their predator activity will continue and control your so-called pests. And again, I was so amazed by the number of spiders that I saw. This is an amazing picture I took. In the morning, I came out and then I was looking at a tree. It was not a tree, it was a spider web. And the camera does a very poor job at capturing something as fine as a spider web, but the entire tree is covered in spider web. So you have your crops growing like crazy if you do this kind of practice, where the forest and the farm is integrated and the wilderness and civilization is integrated. And basically you are making the crops forget who they are. They start to think that they are weeds. They are wild again, and they will start to grow like crazy. They will overpower the weeds. But still, you do need to weed. Let's make that clear. To a certain extent. Anyway, I had a very good growth, very good crop. As opposed to the beans, the deer was not interested in cabbage and radish. So I had a very good harvest. And then turned them into kimchi. Oh, yesterday, Lance was talking about food fermentation. I have a lot to talk with regard to fermentation. Maybe next time. So fermentation. These are the three perspectives that I want to introduce when we talk about fermentation. Number one is wild versus cultured. So is the microbe wild? Is it something in the wilderness, or is it something that humans have cultured? Number two is it something that is complex and a fermentation that has many different species of microbes mixed together in an open system that is constantly interacting with the environment? Or is the fermentation done by a singular species of organism in a closed system, for example, in a lab? Number three is the microorganism indigenous, coming from your own natural local region, or has it been introduced from outside foreign regions? These three perspectives are the fundamentals in viewing fermentation. And kimchi is most popular Korean fermented food, and I love and respect kimchi. But if I really have to pick the number one fermented food, I'm sorry to kimchi, but I will pick this one as the number one fermented food. In my knowledge, this is the best fermented food in the world, in my knowledge. This is basically a block of cooked soya beans, dried and fermented. It's very similar to nuruk that Lance was mentioning yesterday, but nuruk is made from grains. This is called meju. Meju is made from beans. And you can see, if you crack this open, you can see the outside layer and the inside are different. What does that mean? There's the yin-yang interaction within the nuruk fermentation. The outside is the aerobic, the dry fermentation, mostly fungus oriented, and the inside is the moist, wet, dark, anaerobic, more of bacteria oriented fermentation. But of course, as the meju continues to dry, the fungus will enter deeper and deeper. Anyway, so this is an yin-yang interaction that you can see in a fermented food. And then what does this picture remind you of? I was listening to Peter's talk yesterday, and he was showing the photograph from the farmers of 40 centuries. Remember the compost pile covered in clay, and the clay gets cracked. I find a great similarity in that picture and this picture. And I believe the principles are the same, where the aerobic and the anaerobic are helping each other in a yin-yang correlation. So let me talk about microbial inputs. And there are three types of microbial inputs. Number one is the commercial ones, the separated, where the individual microorganism is separated, isolated, and they're mostly patented, turned into products. They are sold in a commercial setting, and all of them are produced in labs in a controlled, closed environment. They are the lab-made microbial inputs. And I'm not just talking about farming inputs. All the fermented food industry, they're using the number one method. It's like if you go out and buy yogurt, kefir, you buy something, most of the time there will be lab-made cultures. Number two is DIY inputs. You make them at home, you ferment at home. So they are the homemade ones, like everything that we do, like the IMOs, the composting, the kimchi, the meju, duruk, they are the homemade ones. So we tend to prefer homemade, and we tend to believe that they are better than lab-made, and I agree. But we tend to disregard number three. And number three is actually the most important in my view. Microbial activity is a result and response to the environment. So instead of humans trying to grow microbes and ferment them in a certain way to their own purpose, you let nature do the fermentation, because microbial activity is taking place everywhere. So this nature-made microbial input would be the far more superior form of microbial input. And then now you will understand more what I mean by no input farming, because nature is making the input for you. For example, if you have animals and you have them in a confined space, you have an animal house, and if you are spraying microbes, if you're spraying lactic acid bacteria, you're trying to inoculate them with some kind of microbe in order to control the smell, the flies. That is not a good approach. You should be able to control the smell and the flies without putting in any microbial inputs at all, which means that the nature, the environment itself is creating the optimum microbial situation to control the smell and the flies and the pathogens. Which means that instead of trying to go for better and more super cool microbial inputs, you should look at the environment of the animal house. If you have a good sunlight, nice wind flowing through, soil and good bedding, that is the more important and more basic element that you have to look into before trying to control everything with microbes, because microbes are the result of the environment. And it is very hard to go the other way around. I mean, if you try to create some kind of environmental condition through microbes, that is very, very difficult, because they are the products of the environment. If you have an aerobic environment, aerobic microbes grow. If you have something somewhere very cold, it is the cold-loving microbes that grow. So everybody knows composting. I think it became probably the most famous single farming method in the organic world. So you pile up this organic matter, you calculate the green to brown ratio, and then you pile it up more than 3 feet so that they become big enough to create heat, and you aerate it, you provide them oxygen by turning them. Of course, you have to maintain an optimum moisture level because that's what the microbes need. And it should be under a shade because the sun will kill them. And if you shred the ingredients, you will have faster fermentation because you have a larger surface area. And if you inoculate them with some kind of microbes, it helps them decompose. So these are the commonly available knowledge about composting. But I put this useless after the compost tips because this is how you compost. Best composter is not a compost pile, but the animal gut. You have the animal, you have the buffalo. So the buffalo, the body is always warm. And this guy is breathing. And it's always moist inside the gut. And of course, it's completely dark. And this buffalo will eat according to its own nutritional needs, which means that the diet is nutritionally balanced. And the buffalo has strong jaws and teeth to grind the plant matter. And when the plant matter enters its stomach, it's inoculated with microbes. So everything that you need, you have here. Why do you pile up the compost and then break your back by turning them? And when you go large scale, you have to bring in machines to turn them, aerate them. This kind of practice became common because people forgot that plants and animals live together. So they were only thinking about how to decompose the plant matter without the animals. And that does not make sense. That creates inefficiency. I will continue to talk. So if you have any questions, just raise them and I will answer them as I go. So everybody knows the concept of food chain, where the plant gets eaten by animal one is eaten by animal two. For example, you have the grasshopper eating the plant, and then you have the frog eating the grasshopper, and then you have the snake eating the frog. So we are very familiar with the food chain. We learned this in elementary school. But this is not the whole picture. This concept of poop chain is what I bring up. And I assure you that this is as important as the food chain. What I'm saying is that all animals poop, and all the poops of all animals will be eaten by other animals and turned into another poop, and that poop will be eaten by other animals, turned into another poop, and then eventually they will go back to plants. This is a very, very important aspect of nature. So I call the two pillars, the food chain and the poop chain, they are the two pillars. One cannot be complete without the other. What does that sound like? It sounds like yin and yang. Now, we go into more technicalities. So how do we utilize this poop chain? And this is exactly what Paul Olivier was talking about yesterday. I really, really appreciate the talk. I loved it. And I actually saw his work earlier and I was greatly inspired. And a lot of the credit I give to him. This is a traditional Korean toilet. Very beautiful. Yeah. Anyway, you go in there, you have the holes where you drop your stuff, not your cell phones, you drop your other stuff. And then you sprinkle rice husk, which is very good at eliminating odor. And I would definitely believe that biochar can also do the job. So if you look at it from the outside, you can see that under the toilet, there's the place where all the shit falls down. So they will accumulate. And when the time comes, people will go in there and take it out and then return it back to soil. So this is how the inside looks like. So I could see that our traditional practice was we bring in a lot of the leaves from the mountains. So all the dry leaves are in there. And because the urine and feces, they will drop on the dry leaves, none of them will be leached out into the soil, but they will be absorbed. So you don't have any loss of nutrients. And from time to time, you can go in there and then bring in, cover them with more leaves. And I had the privilege and the honor of doing the work of taking out the poop from our traditional beautiful toilet. And when you have something pleasant, you always bring your friend. But actually, that's not the toilet that I have. This is the toilet that I have. So the left bucket is leaf mold from the mountains. If you add biochar or rice husk, I believe it will be even better. So what you do is you poop in the bucket and then you just cover it with that stuff and it completely controls the smell and the lid will even control it more. So, and in the back, all those beer bottles are actually urine bottles. So you separate the feces and the urine. And because the beer bottles, they do not leak and they're very strong, you feel very safe when you carry them around to your field. So it's very easy to take them to your field. If you have one big toilet where everything drops and then you have to clean them out once a year, that's a lot of work. But if you have this kind of very small containers, it's very easy to just take them, empty them from time to time. And there are two mistakes about human manure. It's a big mistake. One is that don't try to build a toilet that can completely decompose the manure. So people are trying to design something ingenious where the entire human manure will be decomposed and then completely treated. But you don't need to do it because the poop belongs to soil. The poop does not belong to a toilet. The poop does not belong to a perfect toilet system. The toilet is only a temporary vessel to contain the poop before it goes to the soil. So always return your poop to soil. Remember the soil, food, poop cycle. That is how nature works. So don't try to outsmart nature by trying to build a ingenious toilet. And I'll mention about flush toilet. It is one of the greatest sin of our modern society. I am opposed to flush toilet. They should be abandoned. And second mistake is human manure can be fed to animals rather than microbes. This is again in line with Paul Olivier's talk yesterday. So if you can still use the resources, why do you waste it? And this will be a summary of that principle. The edibles go to the humans, like we eat the food, we eat the good parts, like the corn, the rice, the veggies, we eat it. the inedibles go to the animals, like the skin, the husk, the bran, they go to the animals. And then the human and animal poop goes to other animals. This is like in traditional Korean agriculture. In some parts of Korea, we used to feed human poop to the pigs. And pigs were very happy to eat that because humans are the ones that eat the most nutritious part of the crops. And I heard about how you can raise catfish with rabbit dung. You have a wire mesh where you raise rabbits, and the dung will fall through the wire mesh down into the water where there's the catfish. According to my research, which I just began, it seems that catfish can eat anything. And definitely I will be experimenting that next year. Why? You might be asking, this is sounding too gross, and why do we need to discuss all this? But actually, if you think about it carefully, I believe this is the only way of farming that can truly help the poor people. And not only help the poor people, but this is the only way that we can save ourselves from environmental catastrophe, which comes from agricultural mistakes. And then number 4 is that the finished animal poop goes to maggots. And then the maggot poop goes to worms, worm poop goes to microbes, and microbial poop goes to plants. Again, I do want to say that this work is inspired by Paul Olivier. A lot of credit. But I have been researching and doing many things in similar. He just gave me a lot of opportunity to organize everything. Anyway, so by using this like this, you get food, feed, maggots, worms, compost, and you have waste removal. All of this benefit you can derive from something that would have just been turned into waste. So what is the reason we should not be doing this? Maggots can be fed to chickens. You can see maggots are growing in the poop. Worms can also be used to feed your animals. And this picture is a slightly changed version of the previous picture I had, where I was showing you the soil food poop cycle. But what I'm saying here is that in that food and poop linkage, you are trying to make the greatest efficiency use of resource as possible. So that is why I have that long arrow that is symbolizing the maximum use of resources, which the waste is actually is. The waste is the resource. How much time do I have?
20 minutes.
Okay, so if there's any questions.
So Cheryl had asked earlier what to do if you don't have any animals. Steve in the chat had replied worms, but I think you kind of covered a lot of that. But what would you do if you didn't have a buffalo, water buffalo, or pigs or chickens?
Then you compost. Yeah, if you don't have animals, then you don't have animals. Then you have to do the extra work that the animals do. So the extra work is making compost. So that's why I'm saying nothing is good or bad. If you need compost, you do compost. If you need to make inputs, you make inputs. But everything is according to your needs. So let me just finish off my presentation then.
Okay.
So this is just to give you a another picture of how I'm trying to link the forest and the farm. So this is what I'm doing in the mountains. These are more of the medicinal herbs that can grow in the shade under the trees. So you cannot grow like a corn, or you cannot grow potatoes under the trees, but you can still grow these kind of shade-loving medicinal herbs. And this is taro. I planted them. So I really like this picture because the taro is returning to its original habitat in the wetlands and growing in the wild. What I really want to do is I want them to become confused. I want them to forget that they are crops, and I want them to become free and wild again. This is a turmeric. And this is a very interesting picture. The opening that you see has been created by wild hogs. So these wild pigs come and dig the entire field in search of worms. And because they did the tilling for you, I don't need to do the tilling. And I only go out there and then sow barley. So this was done in September. So they do all the clearing for you, and then I sow barley, and I have a very good growth of barley cover crop. This is rye. And just very briefly, I will show you an interesting picture that I have. This is another farm that I was maintaining, and these are 3 rows of potatoes. So I was mulching them with rice straw. So on the left row, you have the potatoes mulched with rice straw. But the 2 rows on the right, they have been mulched with plastic. I did not do it. Some people, they wanted to help me with my farming, and then they came and covered with the plastic mulch without telling me. So I had a big surprise when I saw it, but all I could do was say thank you. Anyway, but I had the very good experience, because this actually became an experiment of comparing the no plastic mulch versus the plastic mulch. And you can see the result. I don't even need to explain. So they are growing. You can see on the left, it's much greener and bigger. And the 2 on the right, they are more yellow. A closer look, it looks like this. So on the right, the leaves are very thin, and they are rolled up, and the growth is compromised. Okay, now for conclusion. So what am I trying to do? So what are we trying to do? Why are we here? Why are we gathered? Why do we farm? I always think about why I do this and how I can do this better. And I try not to forget my goals in farming. So why do I talk about no cost, no money, no dependence, no input? Because this is the kind of farming that you need to become free. So you don't have to rely on the corporations. You don't have to rely on the market. You don't have to rely on the products. You don't have to rely on the chemicals, the machines, the oil, the capitalist system. So I am talking about how we can become free economically, politically, legally, and also probably the most importantly, spiritually. Because spiritual independence and that strong spirit of freedom is what can guide us in our economic, political, and legal freedom. And I want to emphasize again and again that this is the kind of farming we need for the poor countries and poor people. But actually, not only the poor people, even in the so-called developed countries, most of the farmers are losing money. They are in debt. And one of the major reasons is that the cost of input is rising, and they have to buy everything. They have to buy the fertilizer, the pesticide, the seeds, the machines, the fuel. And then they are in this constant trap of thinking that buying more of those and going larger scale will return them with better money. So they go larger. They buy more inputs. They buy more inputs. But the result is not always optimistic. Many farmers in the so-called developed countries, they are not making ends meet. They are poor. Many are in debt. So poor and rich alike, the farmers are suffering. And what I'm suggesting is one idea that we can think about in order to escape this kind of trap. And why do I talk about yin-yang? Again, this is only one perspective. There can be many different philosophical ideas to explain. However, this is a useful tool that I found in order to fight the errors of philosophy. The errors of philosophy, I mean by the myth of separatedness and separability. So like the forest can be separated from the farm, humans can be separated from nature, spirituality can be separated from material. Those kind of myth of separability. We can also call it dualism. In order to counter that kind of philosophical errors, I brought up yin-yang perspective. If there's other perspectives that are truthful and useful, then I am more than welcome to those. So just like the farm that does not benefit from the destruction of the forest, I'm also talking about the kind of life that we should be living. So a human that does not profit from the destruction of nature, but from the wellness of nature. A human that does not gain from the exploitation of others, but from the happiness of others. A human that does not persist from the affliction of the self, but from the liberation of the self. So I am talking about freedom in 3 levels. And I'm talking about farming as a means for the freedom. So free our inner world from suffering, and free our human world from exploitation, and free our natural world from contamination. Okay, that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. That was wonderful. We have a very thoughtful, more of a comment than a question, from Min Choi of South Korea. Just some food for thought. I sincerely agree with Ray's perspective. However, I'm worried that individual farmers' lives are already very dependent on money, which define the kind and quantity of food farmer produce. For alternative farmers, if their living is still dependent on selling farm products, it is not easy to find alternative markets that accept their produce. I hope that yin-yang farming brings freedom to farmer, but in reality, it seems freedom is needed first to farm yin-yang style. Perhaps we need yin and yang of food production and consumption. Living of these farmers are usually at subsistence level. And then some CSA settings, collective organization of consumers or supporters for their farming seems important. It is about community, really. Yeah, like none of us are isolated. If we are just extensions of our farm, we are all, trying to create basically a new network, right? So, and there is a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I actually agree with what was said because you need to be free first to to do the farming rather than farm in order to become free. That makes quite a lot of sense, and they actually are connected. So I'm not saying that by doing this kind of farming, we can become free. It's not as simple as that. There's a lot of complicated political, legal matters, especially the land ownership legal system and the capitalist market system. There's a lot of obstacles, and we need to think in very realistic terms in order to get through those problems. And what I'm saying is, all my talk is an idea. It's not really the solution to everything. It's an idea that I want to share in considering how we go forward.
Um, what is the role of fungi in the yin yang scheme?
Uh, Yin yang is not. It's not like a fungus is yang, bacteria is yin. It's not like that.
Well, I don't know. It
Sometimes
has a
fungus
yang shape.
sometimes fungus is yang, but in other relation it can become yin. So like I
Right.
will be yang if I have a wife, I will be the yang. But if I have if a child, I'm the yin and the child is the yang. So it always changes.
Right.
So like it's like a left and right.
Mhm.
Uh, so if you stand here, this is left, but if you go here, this is the right. So it's not like fungus is yin or yang. It does not work like that. It's just a philosophical perspective. Yeah.
Um, there is another question. Can you please talk about those varieties of shade tolerant herbs? The farm Robert Hayes is on is 600 feet long with a south to north tree line, lots of shade on the east side.
Uh, those are Korean herbs that I don't know any English about those, but one one very famous shade tolerant crop is ginseng. So if you have a shady forest, definitely go for the ginseng.
So Al Chomika gets chicken poop and sheep poop delivered by his neighbors. He mixes it with molasses, wood chips, and aerated compost tea. Then he takes or he says the sheep poop has a lot of straw in it and is packed into plastic bags, inoculated with pond water and aerated compost tea as well. Could you see a better process? Could I maximize these resources in a better way?
Uh, I cannot talk about a better recipe, but I can talk about the method that I do, which is that whenever I have like a chicken poop or anything that can be utilized as a soil amendment, most of the time I just go out and throw them into the field and finish. I don't do any extra work. Does that answer?
No, I can see that. Like that is where I am. And Paul Olivier is typing a response as well. I think yeah, Paul Olivier had answered something, so we can look at that later. There was another question earlier about do you charge your biochar, or I mean, obviously it's becoming biochar as you've added the charcoal to the poop buckets, but you are starting more with a raw charcoal for your human manure.
Yeah, I am aware of the concept of charging biochar, but so if you have seen the graveyard picture, you can see that I did not put the biochar directly onto the crops, but they go into the yin part of the farms where it is empty and there's no crops. And that's where I put all the manure and the bones and those things get thrown in there. So the biochar stays there and become charged automatically. So it's not like you have the biochar, you do all the work of mixing it with everything and then you finish it and then you take it out and then you apply to the field. I just do everything in the field, much less work.
Yeah. Where my sheep have been roaming the last 2 years, I just go throw charcoal straight out onto the field, knowing that there's just tons of poop already there as well. And there's so much more poop actually flowing when in the rainy season that then I know like our pond it got algae on it for the first time ever. But then what I did is I took half a wheelbarrow load of raw charcoal and threw it into the pond, and then it absorbed all the enough nitrogen that then the algae disappeared.
Yeah. So yeah, basically, you want the nature to do all the work, not you do the work.
How long does your human manure stay in the bucket before you take it to the field, though?
uh, the sooner the better. Like maybe once a week. Yeah, doesn't really matter. If you stays longer but doesn't smell, it's okay. But it's like you take a walk and you just enjoy. Take these bottles of urine and a bucket of poop, and then you dump it in your soil. Does not have to stay long.
Awesome. Um, I don't know. Any last few words you can think of on your own? I think
Oh, so no more questions.
no, I think there is actually, but
Okay.
uh, the trench system you spoke of, it was for compacted soil or for soil that doesn't, or wait, okay, I thought the trench system he spoke of was for compacted soil only, not for soil that doesn't need rehab. Question mark.
Yeah. I mean, compacted soil, the best approach I found is that if you leave it to nature and you try to have the plant roots drill into the compacted soil and the microbes become activated, everything, it is very, very difficult. I mean, takes very long time. So that part, I think human intervention is required for efficiency's sake. So I do think that we need to break the hard pan. But if you have already good soil, which is very soft until very soft, very deep, then you don't need this kind of trench method. Unless you want to try some kind of other experiments where you intentionally also dig a trench in a soft soil. But it's not an essential process. Whereas in the hard soil, I would say it's an essential process.
Awesome. Um, and you're told if you ever visit Humboldt or Vancouver Island, you have folks to go visit.
I would love to. When this all this crazy restriction everything finishes, there's many people I want to meet.
For sure. 2023, we'll do this all in person. And well, I guess maybe I'll just start to introduce Gil.
Sure.
I would like to thank you very much for being with us. And well, I also would like to credit Ray that this conference would not have happened without Ray's help. He's been integral in helping spread the word as well as contacting people, helping me kind of formulate the idea of how this was really going to happen. I just had an idea that this would be a great event to have happen, and Ray, he was just always been my pal. I gotta say, hey, I got a crazy idea. You want to come down to Washington and teach a class? Oh, sure. 4 years later now, yes, that's how I first met Ray in person. Was he came to Washington State from British Columbia, and we met in person then.
Yeah, since you raised the issue and we have all the participants listening, what I do want to mention is that I really appreciate the initiative that you took, because there's a lot of conferences on the technicalities of natural farming or nature farming or organic farming, regenerative, everything. There's a lot of discussions on that. That is very good, but what I felt was that we can focus more on the why we are doing this, more the philosophical, more the what can we do with this in this world to make it better? That kind of approach. Of course, everybody else is also doing it, but I wanted our conference to focus more on that. So That's why I'm very happy. People like Palekar is bringing in like concept of a lot spiritual farming, and Kawaguchi is also another spiritual leader. And anyway, so I think this conference is